Hello, everyone. I think James, Benjamin, and I, uh, we're here to do a reflection on our first, first big experiment in this village network, this mutual aid village network, where um, we allocated this micro grant from Building Belonging, and it totals about 4,500 US dollars. Um, and this is our intention, our main intention for this experiment is to let money flow like water, instead of hoarding it, instead of trying to invest it, invest to make more money. We're really trying to understand how we give and receive money and how we use money as one of the many nutrients to support this mutual aid network, to support meaningful work, especially meaningful work that is undercompensated in the current market system. And it's a small step, but it's very aligned with our overall long-term vision of this mutual aid village. Um, and then another kind of intention that we hold throughout this process is that we want to experiment, we want to relate to money in new ways. We want to flow money as if we're already living the the world that we want to live in. Um, so so we use the happy money story process to facilitate this collective decision making of 5 core members of this village network, and over period of we had 4 calls over a month and a half to learn. This is our first time. We've never allocated this much money among the 5 of us before. And then today, Teresa and Narayan cannot be here, but the 3 of us are here to just report on their behalf. Yeah, so here we're happy to tell you a little more details of what we have done and what we have learned. Benjamin, would you want to take it from here?
I'll definitely jump in. I appreciate some of the context that you laid, Carol, and very related to what is the experience of working with money that we want to embody has been this theme of money as lubricant. So how can little bits of money be used as lubricant to support other kinds of flow and other kinds of value generation? That's been a big focus. And it felt really good to get to the point where we started to do this allocation exercise. We've actually been working up to it over close to a year and about 30 calls. And we decided as of maybe 2 months ago that's when we did our strategic planning, this was one of our biggest focuses. So it felt really satisfying to then finally feel ready and really dive into the specifics of it. And it was a cool and quite iterative process. It started with Carol suggesting that she had this process that she's done before called Happy Money Story, and she was going to adapt it for us. That started with a call where we did some sensing about what needs are we sensing, needs and opportunities are we sensing in ourselves, in our relationships, and in the network around us, with the idea that that sensing would form a good basis then for being able to come up with potential experiment proposals. So we had a call where we did that. Then we generated collectively a whole bunch of proposals. At that point, James had come up with a 3x3 framework, and I remember us plotting them on his framework. The framework had physical, cognitive, and emotional, and I, we, and world on it. So that was neat. And then asynchronously, we all took a step back. We looked at all the proposals we had kind of generated, and then we each came up with our own proposal for, given all the ideas on the table, how would we allocate the 45-ish $100? And we came back to our next call and we pitched to one another, asked some questions to understand more about one another's ideas. And I think we spent about 2 calls in that process, because what we realized was it took a while for us to actually understand specifically what everyone was suggesting. And we also started to see particular ideas fitting into various streams. Um, I think some of the streams, I don't have them up right now, but financial, maybe one of them is financial resilience. One of them
Financial
is
security.
financial security, compensating ourselves and others for purpose-driven work, a learning-related stream, and then a stream around gifts. And
Gifts,
each of these, yeah, and
gifting
each of the
culture. Yeah.
gifting culture, yeah, and each of these streams had different kinds of ideas and particular experiments associated with them. So it took us a couple of calls to get a clear enough understanding of what everyone was proposing and how they all fit together for us to feel really good stepping into the actual decision making process. And then we did this fun dot voting-esque activity where we had all of the streams, the particular ideas, and then we all each had different bird emojis that we put onto the framework to show where we were voting. And after we did that, we were able to pick what our priority areas were, what the specific funding allocation for each would be, and also we ended up thinking it was important for one of us to be like the lead on each experiment idea to make sure that it wouldn't be lost. And then since then, we've started to move into project planning for each of the experiments. So just every call, we've picked 1 or 2 that we've looked at, and so we've kind of been taking steps gradually downwards into the very specifics, which is where we've been hanging out for the past couple of calls.
Thanks, Benjamin. So I guess I'll jump in here with some of the insights and observations on top of that stream of events and what are the important things that we've learned. Not exhaustively, of course. I'll pass the mic as well. But I want to mention several interesting things that have come out of this for us. One was using the sense that we'd built up over so many calls before this sequence of this exercise is just, I think we have a good attunement to the group dynamics amidst the 5 of us. And as we were going through this, we could really notice like, oh, something is not flowing here at this time. It feels sticky or it feels strenuous and effortful versus when we knew that things were going well, they felt flowing, they felt easy, and there was a coherence there that really mattered. And I think developing that over months beforehand, like that definitely served us and helped us to steer the overall process at a meta level. Because we did make some significant corrections for ourselves over this series of even just 4 calls here. One of the things that was used for was, kind of how do we work with Happy Money Story and when and where is it applicable here? I think I would summarize this briefly as Happy Money Story works very well to allocate between things, between known things, and how much goes in what bucket or in which category. But it works less well for figuring out what the things are in the first place. And that's where we ran into some grindy kind of friction in our own usage of it, because we started out, I mean, Happy Money Story, if you've got, say, I don't know, revenue from something that a group did and you want to allocate it between people, it's very well known. Like, what are the buckets? The buckets are people. And you're sort of just like, oh, well, how much do you want each person to have? And it's great for that. But we actually wanted or needed to have generative discussion to wander around in the wilderness for a little bit with ideas and brainstorming and finding and sharpening and refining our ideas. And that ended up being very important. And so we did some work to go from very abstract to some specific categories. And even the category abstraction, we went then into very, specific ideas and projects, and talked at that level, and then came back to the categories and shifted the categories a little bit, and then went back to the detailed ideas, if I'm recalling correctly. But guiding ourselves through all of that, a lot of that didn't fit into just the recipe of Happy Money Story, but we, in the generative times, we did a bunch of rounds, and we did some excursions of dipping down a scope level and going into some detail to illustrate the concrete example characteristics of what we were talking about, and then back up to the different layers of scope there. Another thing I'll notice, and this was maybe a highlight for me in particular, was the flavor of the money matters. And kind of where does the money come from? What strings are attached? This came from a grant, and the language around it, and that there was a written grant proposal that I came in and read, um, and I was thinking like, oh, okay, this is part of the nonprofit world. What are the strings attached? Oh, the proposal says we're going to spend the money for this, but not for this, and so we have to follow the rules of the grant proposal. And later we relaxed that, and we discovered that I was holding that a lot more tightly than other people, and we asked the question like, oh wait, no, we have a lot of flexibility here of what we do with this, and that really changed, for me at least, the dynamics of what we could spend the money on, how we could relate to the money, what sort of stance we could take with the money. And the other flavor thing that I'll notice is just the way that where the money comes from, and that it was a grant from the outside versus us putting our own money in and doing something. I think that really affects the kind of considerations that we have, and flowing money around like water. And what you would, I don't know, think of the typical things that you would spend money on yourself for in your daily life. And what do you consider worth it, or utilitarian, or do you splurge, or how do you treat yourself and your money? I think that changes when you consider, oh, what do I want for this other person over here in the group? And our feelings of care and service and wanting to take care of people, they're kind of different for other people versus ourselves. And I think we learned something about that, and um, how that helps maybe or hinders us, and how we can play a role in serving each other by maybe like I don't know, augmenting the perspective that we have towards ourselves, or helping to take that outside external perspective. So yeah, I think that's my list. I'll pass it around for what else was important.
I can just share one thing, um, which is group decision making. Sometimes, um, sometimes there's a lot of detail. Sometimes like there's a lot of information present, depending on what you're trying to make decisions about, and there's a lot of detail. And processing all of that detail can be very computationally intensive. And so this is why we would tend to delegate, or like oftentimes we will assign an individual or a subgroup to metabolize or analyze or make choices in a certain area, and then they'll come back to the main group with a proposal or something. But there's a question, I guess, for any group around when is it okay to break off, or to kind of not not contend with all the detail and make a good enough decision, because sometimes that can create momentum or allows you to take action, which feeds back into what you're doing. But other times it may feel really important for, like, this may be a domain or a situation or a problem where we actually feel like the whole group really needs to be on board and really needs to understand every step of the process. And I think that there's a learning for our group as a whole, and for many groups, around how to make those discernments of what kind of situation are we in, and to what extent does it make sense for us to really put in all of the time and energy to do more computationally intensive approach. I feel like for our group so far, we've actually tended to lean more in the direction of going through everything together and really understanding things together and making the decision with a collective sense of everyone buying into it. Although we have navigated polarities of values, which have also included at various points people being excited to just kind of make a choice and move on because of the sense of how that would feed into things. And I don't think that there's any perfect answer here, but I do think that as a group, I'm feeling and hoping that there's a process of maturation going on as we develop more and more awareness of what kind of situation or context are we in, and what kind of decision making style seems like it is well situated to that situation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's something really alive in me that I want to build on what you just said, Benjamin. Um, yeah, it's interesting because now some memory came back. At one point, when I was facilitating the Happy Money Story process, there's a typical way that kind of avoids the intensive group decision making is to, if we have $5,000 and 5 people in the room, then each person can allocate $1,000 and they don't have to talk to each other. They can just decide, and then they aggregate, all of this, and then you have a total number for, how much money goes to what. And then in some ways, at the time, I was like in a rushing mode. I was like, well, why don't we just divide and conquer? Either divide the money and allocate on our own, or just delegate, people to investigate different streams, and they make proposals, and then I think, yeah, and then some of us in the group felt a lot of tension around that. And wanting to kind of like really stay together as a group instead of divide and conquer. And then it's interesting to experience the stuck and then the flow again. So not just water, not just money is flowing in our process, but also our collective attention and collective flow, in this whole process. And then what I've learned is that I really now, after kind of like the whole group really sticking together, trying to figure out and prioritize, and it did feel, it did feel like it might have taken quite some time, but now that we've done that, it really also helps me to learn what is important for each of us here, and then how do we collective aggregate our intelligence, in ways it's not just simple divide and conquer. Yeah, it also helps to prioritize, because at the end of the day, it's still, this whole collective still need to prioritize. I think oftentimes in groups, people diverge, and then there's so many good ideas, and people don't want to criticize other ideas or devalue them. But then there's so many ideas, people get overwhelmed and don't follow up. So I think in our approach, by staying together, we are prioritizing, and also we're making sure each experiment, each stream, is being tracked, has a good plan. Yeah, I really love that. We may not need to do it every time, but for the first time, I really enjoyed the process, and I learned a lot from it.
Yeah, I will make one more brief comment, which is, for me personally, given our particular group and this situation, I'm also glad we ended up choosing to stick together through the decision-making process, because I feel like, especially with our first round of working with money, it gave us a lot more surface area on one another, and I feel a lot more coherence coming out the other side. Like we get something deeply and we're all tracking it, although we're tracking it from different points of view. Having said that, I don't necessarily think that having done the whole thing together was necessarily, or let me put it this way, when Carol had the instinct of delegating things, I don't necessarily think that that would have been a wrong choice. In fact, I think that there are many groups in our position who would have chosen that or could have chosen that, and that could have worked very well for them. The interesting thing, though, is that one of the ways that groups can get stuck in decision making, I think, tends to be when there are competing approaches or values on the table. Different people have different ways that they want to lean, but we haven't yet gotten to the point where we're able to see the underlying pattern or reify or explicate that in a way that we can see how they're competing with one another. And so then the group can end up getting stuck in this kind of in between purgatory-ish type space, and a lot of energy can get spent and people can kind of get frustrated or disappointed. So I wonder if that might be a common failure mode, whether it's in terms of this particular kind of case of values that we're talking about, or it may come up in other ways as well.
In my career and life experience, I've seen a heck of a lot more groups get bitten by not slowing down enough to slow down to go fast, and then being tripped up later down the road by the things that they tried to avoid coming back and turning out to be important to resolve. So that thus, of course, mystifies the art of choosing. When do you slow down and when do you go fast? When do you dive in together? When do you delegate? And yeah, I'll just, as my capper, it's that meta art of sensing where is the energy and where might the payoff be, and when is the right time to invest how much time and energy is the art.
Well, this was fun.
Yeah. All right. Do we feel complete for now?
Yeah,
All right.
thanks.
I'll
Thanks,
stop.
everyone.
Thank you for listening.